Now, despite the investment into the continent, Africa faces several challenges. Let's find out what adjustments need to be made to make us more attractive. We're joined by the Africa Finance Corporation's President and CEO, Samaila Zubairu. Thanks so much for your time, sir. We appreciate it.
First off,
before we actually get your expertise and, get your advice on how we can make this work, tell us about the field of expertise and what exactly it is that you do.
So Africa Finance Corporation was set up 11 years ago to reduce the infrastructure deficit on the continent. Africa's potential is reduced by the infrastructure deficit. Our productivity is reduced by 40% because of our infrastructure deficit. Our growth rate is deflated by 2 to 5% because of our infrastructure deficit. For you to get context on what that is, if you want to export a container from North Africa, for example, say Cairo, it will take you about 12 days. It will cost about $625 to do that. If you wanted to export the same container from Central African Republic, it's going to take you 7 weeks, and it's going to cost you $5,625. It is easier for an African company that has operations in Nigeria and in Cameroon to import raw materials that can be produced by the Nigerian operation into Cameroon from China. Why? Because there is no adequate rail link connecting both countries.
Yeah.
So intra-African trade is at about 10%. When you compare that to EU, is about 70%. Intra-Asian trade, about 59%. So you can see why we need to have adequate infrastructure. So our mission at AFC is to develop and finance these deficit opportunities into bankable projects.
Yeah.
So what we do is we work with sponsors, we work with African governments that have plans or have opportunities for infrastructure to convert those opportunities to bankable projects, and we invest in them. We provide them both development capital, we provide equity capital where it's required, and we also provide debt. So what we do is we invest across the entire spectrum of the capital structure required to bring projects to reality.
So given the geopolitical challenges on the continent, is that realistic, or is this why we actually see that there is a delayed reaction to infrastructure development on the continent?
So there are several reasons why we have delays, and we have faster pace in certain countries. So we have 54 countries. So whenever we're talking about Africa, we have to put it in context. So the key factor that causes delay, I would say, is capacity. Capacity being twofold. First, political will sometimes. So most governments want to improve the lot of their people, and they want to actually build roads, bridges, airports, seaports. But there is a regulatory framework that is required to attract capital. I always tell people capital is very shy. It likes safe environments, and it's used to working in safe environments. So we need in Africa to create that environment that is safe for capital. So that typically requires a lot of licensing and permittings, and sometimes credit enhancements on the part of governments. So the decision to do all of those sometimes is not as fast, and sometimes the people don't quite understand because they've not done this before. Typically what they're used to is government just spending the money. But when you want to attract private capital, you have to do certain things differently. So sometimes that takes time.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big problems. The second problem is that the people that are actually working in these institutions, need more capacity because they need to understand what they are doing. They need, because they don't have experience, so sometimes it would take them longer. And then, of course, the deficit on the continent is about 170 billion are required annually for the next 10 years. That considers both new build and maintaining what exists.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of money. So while we have a lot of capital on the continent, if we look at institutional savings for pension funds, we still need a lot more capital from outside the continent. So mobilizing that capital also takes time. So what we do at AFC is to create conditions for that capital to flow into the continent.
Yeah.
By de-risking the projects, and making sure the projects are similar to the opportunities they find anywhere else in the world. That also takes time.
Now, you went as far as saying that South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola have dragged the continent behind. How so?
I mean, I didn't say it. The records say that growth in South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola is not according to target. That's just the fact. But you can also understand that. So for the commodity-related economies like Nigeria and Angola, oil prices have been doing as well, but they've improved. And the governments are working to make sure that they can catch up. They are also putting in place several other programs to ensure that they can deliver goods to their people. The South African government is also coming up with a bold plan, and they are working towards attracting investments into the country. And I think that all countries go through cycles. We know that from looking at the world. So every country has a time that things will not go as planned, and this is just one of those periods. But are they taking the right decisions to make sure that they're on the path of growth? Yes, they are.
Yeah. And what about the roles of other countries? You talk about countries like South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya even, some of the few African countries that attract foreign investors. How do other countries in Africa also become more attractive?
So, 6 of the fastest growing economies in the world today are in Africa. So that tells you something. And everybody tells you that Africa is the next frontier. And all we need to do is to focus on certain key aspects. So if we focus on power, focus on transport and logistics, focus on beneficiation of our natural resources, we focus on import substitution, we would create the environment for prosperity for our people.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and your insight. We do appreciate it. That, of course, was Samaila Zubairu. I'm trying to get your name right, not to offend you. Thanks so much for that. President and CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation.
Thank you for the